Right now, if someone breaks the law, there's a trial, a judge, a lawyer, a system built over centuries to make punishment as controlled as possible. So here's a question nobody thinks to ask. What did ancient humans do before any of that existed? Not medieval kingdoms, not Roman courts, not Egyptian pharaohs. We're going back further, 100,000 years, 200,000 years, back when there were no prisons, no laws written anywhere, no police, just people, and the one terrifying question every group had to answer. What do you do with someone who breaks the rules? The answer changes everything we think we know about justice, fear, and why human society holds together at all. But first, did ancient humans even execute each other? Or is that just something we invented later? This is actually a serious scientific debate. For a long time, researchers assumed early humans were too small, too scattered, too focused on survival to organize anything resembling punishment. But that assumption turned out to be wrong, very wrong. In 2016, anthropologist Christopher Boehm published research that would reframe how we understand early human society entirely. He had spent decades studying hunter-gatherer groups, some of the last communities on Earth still living the way our ancestors did. What he found was this. Every single group, without exception, had a system for dealing with people who threatened the group, and the punishments were not gentle, because they couldn't be. Think about what it meant to live in a group of 30 or 40 people 100,000 years ago, in the middle of nowhere. There were no walls, no locks, no backup coming. If one person in your group became dangerous, someone who stole food from others during a famine, someone who attacked members of their own tribe, someone who couldn't be controlled, that person was an existential threat. Not a moral problem, a survival problem. The group had to act, and the methods they used were as brutal as the world they lived in. The first method was the one nobody talks about: exile. It sounds soft compared to what came later. It wasn't. Being exiled from your group in the ancient world wasn't a punishment. It was a slow death sentence. Alone, you couldn't hunt large animals. You couldn't sleep safely. You couldn't survive a serious injury. You couldn't make fire in a storm. And perhaps most importantly, you couldn't heal. Every hunter-gatherer community functioned as a living medical system. People cleaned wounds, shared food during illness, watched over those who couldn't watch over themselves. Stripping that away and a twisted ankle wasn't an inconvenience. It was a death warrant. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups have found that solitary humans in the wild rarely survive longer than a few weeks without community. Exile wasn't mercy. It was just quieter than the alternative. The group didn't have to watch. But exile only worked for manageable offenses. For something worse, for someone who had become genuinely dangerous, who had killed a member of the tribe, or who had done something so destabilizing that the group's survival was at risk. Something more final was required. That's where the second method came in, and researchers call it something remarkable: communal execution. In 2017, a team of archaeologists excavating a site in Kenya uncovered a 10,000-year-old massacre, the skeletal remains of 27 individuals, men, women, and children. Many had crushed skulls, several had their hands bound. The injuries were consistent with close-range attack, not battle, not a raid from an outside group. This was deliberate, organized, done by people who knew their victims. It was one of the earliest known examples of coordinated killing within or between early human groups. But here's the part that changes the story. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm's research found something in living hunter-gatherer communities that explains exactly why this happened. In every group he studied, execution was never carried out by one person. It was always collective. Every member of the group participated, or at minimum witnessed it. And this wasn't cruelty, it was designed. If everyone shares responsibility for the act, no single individual becomes the executioner, the one with blood on their hands who might now be feared or resented. The group remains united. Justice, if you can call it that, belongs to everyone. It's the oldest form of jury duty in human history, and there's something else. When everyone participates, no one can later claim they disagreed. There is no faction nursing a grievance in the shadows. The decision was unanimous, and the act made it permanent. The group didn't just remove a threat. They sealed themselves together by removing it. The third method was the strangest one, and in some ways, the most psychologically sophisticated. They used fear itself as the weapon. Anthropologists studying tribes in Papua New Guinea, the Amazon and sub-Saharan Africa, communities that preserved ancient social structures far longer than the rest of the world, found the same pattern everywhere. Before physical punishment came social death. The condemned person was treated as if they no longer existed. Their name was not spoken. Eye contact was refused. Food was not shared with them. No one responded when they spoke. Their shelter was ignored when it needed repair. They were present, physically, in the group and completely erased from it. In 2014, psychologist Kipling Williams published decades of research into the effect of ostracism on the human brain. What he found was alarming. Being ignored and excluded activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The same regions of the brain that process a broken bone process social exclusion. For a creature wired for group survival, as every ancient human was, being treated as invisible was, neurologically, indistinguishable from being hurt. The punishment happened entirely inside the mind of the person experiencing it, and it was devastating. But of all of the methods ancient humans used, one stands out above the rest. Not because it was the most violent, but because of why it existed at all. In groups where exile, communal execution, and social death weren't enough, where the offender was so dangerous, so unpredictable, that even proximity was a threat, ancient humans developed what researchers call preemptive removal. The group would identify someone not after they had destroyed the community, but before. Someone whose behavior was escalating, someone who was becoming uncontrollable, and they would act before the worst happened. Bohm documented this in hunter-gatherer groups across 3 continents. The decision was never made by one person. It was discussed quietly, collectively, over days, and when the group reached consensus, they moved together. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of calculation, out of the same cold logic that made ancient humans so dangerous as a species in the first place. They could plan, they could coordinate, they could think past the immediate moment into what came next. So here's where we've ended up. 100,000 years ago, before courts or laws or constitutions, small groups of humans were already solving one of civilization's oldest problems. What do you do with the person who threatens everything? And the answers they came up with, exile, collective action, psychological erasure, preemptive protection, weren't random. They were sophisticated. They were deliberate. And almost every justice system that came after, the Roman courts, the Greek assemblies, the tribal councils of every culture on earth, built itself on the same foundations these groups discovered sitting around fires with nothing but each other and a problem they had to solve. Here's the part nobody talks about. The cruelty wasn't the point. Control was. And control wasn't cruelty at all. It was the thing that made living together possible in the first place. Because without it, there was no tribe. Without the tribe, there was no survival. Every execution, every exile, every silent treatment that drove someone to the edge was, underneath it all, an act of collective self-preservation. The first justice system wasn't written in a courtroom. It was worked out in the dark, around a fire, by people who had no other choice. And the rules they invented then, That the group decides, that no single person holds all the power, that some acts cannot be allowed if the community is going to survive. Those rules never went away. They got written down eventually. They got given names. Due process, reasonable doubt, trial by peers. But the bones underneath all of it are ancient, older than writing, older than cities, older than civilization as we define it. The next time you read about a verdict, a courtroom, a jury, a sentence handed down by 12 strangers, you're looking at something that started around a fire, with a problem no one wanted to have, and a group of people who loved their community enough to do the hardest thing it required. You're still living by them right now,